Tonight at 10, President Trump engages in a public feud with his own intelligence agencies and accuses them of criminal behaviour. He blames them for the resignation of his National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, the man who admitted misleading colleagues about his contacts with Russia.
I think it's very, very unfair what's happened to General Flynn, the way he was treated, and the documents and papers that were illegally, I stress that, illegally leaked.
We'll have the latest as the president also breaks with diplomatic tradition in the search for peace in the Middle East. He tells the Israeli Prime Minister that establishing a Palestinian state alongside Israel is no longer the only option that America favours. The ruling body of the Church of England rejects a controversial report that marriage in church should only be between a man and a woman. Malaysia is asked to hand over the body of Jong-nam, the half-brother of the North Korean leader who died of a suspected poisoning attack. Protests in the suburbs of Paris following the alleged rape of a black youth worker by a city police officer.
There's Robin on the move, looking to pick out the top corner. What a goal!
And it was a miserable night for Arsenal in tonight's Champions League match against Bayern Munich.
In the south, a rise in reports of hate crime across the region, but what can be done to tackle the problem? And a Hampshire charity calls on the government to do more to help veterans sent to prison.
Good evening. President Trump's public dispute with his own intelligence agencies has intensified. He's accused them of breaking the law by leaking classified information, and he blamed them for the resignation of his National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn. Mr. Flynn had admitted misleading colleagues about his contacts with Russian diplomats. The president is now under even greater scrutiny in relation to alleged Russian links, as our North America editor John Sopel reports now.
These are not the best of times. Not yet 4 weeks in, his travel ban's been blocked, his national security advisor's been fired, and the questions about his links with Russia are piling up. And when the president is angry, the place he vents is on Twitter. And boy, did he let rip this morning. This Russian connection nonsense is merely an attempt to cover up the many mistakes made in Hillary Clinton's losing campaign. The real scandal here is that classified information is illegally given out by intelligence like candy, very un-American. And on the reporting of this, the fake news media is going crazy with their conspiracy theories and blind hatred.
The President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Israel.
At his news conference with the Israeli Prime Minister, no mention of concerns about links with Russia. And you'd never have guessed that it was the President who'd forced General Flynn's resignation.
Michael Flynn, General Flynn, is a wonderful man. I think he's been treated very, very unfairly by the media, as I call it, the fake media in many cases. And I think it's really a sad thing that he was treated so badly. I think in addition to that, from intelligence, papers are being leaked, things are being leaked. It's criminal action, criminal act.
But on Capitol Hill, there's one central concern among senior Republicans and Democrats. It's the administration's links to the Russian government.
The base issue is getting to the bottom of what the Russian interference was and what the relationship was with associates of the Trump effort. And so that is the big elephant in the room that has got to be dealt with in the most appropriate way. It's the American people need to understand, we need to understand, and it needs to be dealt with quickly.
So this is what we know. On January the 15th, the Vice President went on television to deny that Russian sanctions had been discussed in those phone calls. On January the 26th, the Acting Attorney General tells the White House actually they were. That's when the President was informed. But it wasn't until February the 9th, when the story was about to break in the press, that Vice President Mike Pence was told. That means he was deliberately kept in the dark for over 2 weeks. And listen to the President last Friday.
I don't know about it. I haven't seen it. What report is that?
And this was his spokesman yesterday seeking to explain that discrepancy.
What he was asked specifically is, was he aware of a Washington Post story? He hadn't seen that at the time. Of course he was involved. I just said that he was aware of the situation right after the White House counsel informed him back in January.
It's hard to avoid the conclusion that this is an administration that is reeling. Just take Donald Trump's controversial travel ban. He announced at the end of last week there'd be a new executive order on Monday or Tuesday to replace it. It's now Wednesday. There's been nothing. Work is not getting done because of the turmoil. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Well, as we've seen, the president has hosted a meeting at the White House with the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. And Mr. Trump seems to have cast aside 2 decades of American policy in the Middle East by suggesting that the creation of a new Palestinian state alongside Israel, the so-called two-state solution, is no longer the only peace plan under consideration by America. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, has more details.
When Mr. and Mrs. Netanyahu arrived at the White House, there seemed to be real warmth. The Israeli Prime Minister certainly hoped so. He had a sour relationship with President Obama and wants this visit to be a new start. Before he was elected president, Mr. Trump seemed ready to give Israel a blank check on the Palestinians. Mr. Netanyahu authorized thousands more homes for Jews in the occupied territories in defiance of international law within days of Mr. Trump's inauguration.
Very important to me.
But now he's in the White House, the president has changed his tune. He sees himself as America's greatest deal maker and seems to believe he can make the deal between Israel and the Palestinians that evaded the last 4 American presidents. But that, he said, means give and take.
As far as settlements, I'd like to see you hold back on settlements for a little bit. We'll work something out, but I would like to see a deal be made. I think a deal will be made. As with any successful negotiation, both sides will have to make compromises. You know that, right?
Both sides.
But in a Middle East that is often chaotic, Mr. Netanyahu sees opportunities.
For the first time in my lifetime, and for the first time in the life of my country, Arab countries in the region do not see Israel as an enemy, but increasingly as an ally.
And that's because Israel and the Arab states in the Gulf have a common enemy. It's Iran. It's seen as a big threat in the region by the governments of Israel and the US. But other Arab countries of the Gulf are also suspicious of the Iranians, prompting that talk of a broader regional deal. Now, among these are smaller nations such as Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. And among them, crucially, is Iran's main regional rival, Saudi Arabia. Israel has settled 600,000 Jews on occupied land the Palestinians want for a state. But it's doubtful a shared antipathy to Iran would be enough to persuade big Arab countries, even if they could, to force Palestinians to take a deal that would be acceptable to the Israeli right. Israeli right-wingers do not like President Trump's call to stop expanding settlements. They prefer his backing away from a two-state solution, an independent Palestine alongside Israel. Many people on the ground believe the likeliest outcome is no solution at all. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Well, during the day, President Trump's new Defence Secretary, James Mattis, has warned members of NATO that America could moderate its commitment to the alliance if they fail to boost defence spending by the end of the year. General Mattis, speaking in Brussels, insisted that NATO was the fundamental bedrock of cooperation and security, and he claimed that Mr. Trump was still a strong supporter. As our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale tells us.
After years of fighting in deserts, the US Marine Corps are back in Europe. We joined them in Norway, learning how to survive and fight in cold weather. All part of reassuring allies, especially those like Norway that share a border with a more assertive Russia. But this defence cooperation is far from guaranteed, with President Trump having questioned NATO's relevance.
European allies not spending enough is an issue back where you're from. Some people say it's obsolete. What's your view of NATO?
I think NATO has a great partnership with us. We are here today because NATO has asked us to be part of that. We're part of NATO, NATO's part of us, and we're working together.
Today, the new US Defense Secretary, himself a former Marine, arrived at NATO's headquarters to restate that commitment. But it came with a warning.
It's a fair demand that all who benefit from the best defense in the world carry their proportionate share of the necessary cost to defend freedom.
In private, General Mattis was even more blunt, giving his allies effectively an ultimatum. He told them the US would moderate its commitment to NATO unless they set out plans to increase their defense spending by the end of the year. America's defense budget dwarfs its European allies. The US, one of only 5 NATO countries, including the UK, that meets the alliance's own target of spending 2% of GDP or national income on defense. The vast majority of NATO countries are still well below that goal, even though they all made a commitment 2 years ago to work towards spending that 2%.
Well, Secretary Mattis made it very clear, speaking to the NATO alliance today, that the patience of the American taxpayer is now at an end, that we do need to step up.
General Mattis has not said what will happen if they don't. And this isn't the first warning. But under President Trump, allies cannot take this kind of defence support for granted. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
So after all of today's developments, let's go live to the White House and talk to our North America editor, John Sopel. John, what is your sense tonight of the kind of scrutiny that this administration is now under?
Hugh, I'm sure there are times when Donald Trump sits in that famous house and thinks, I am the most powerful man in the world, the king of all I survey. And there are other times when he thinks, I am besieged on all sides. I've got quarrelling within the White House. I've got government departments that are opposing me. I've got agencies that are leaking against me. I've got a hostile press. It all feels pretty unfriendly. I can't get anything done. Certainly, the transition from campaigning to governing is proving far more difficult than he probably imagined. Now, I've seen some commentators saying, he's not going to last 4 years. He will be impeached. This is all going to end in tears. I think that is all wildly premature because the basic maths haven't changed. He has a Republican House, a Republican Senate. He can govern, but has it got off to a very rocky start? Oh, you bet it has. And it seems that there could be still an awful lot more turbulence to come.
John, thanks very much again. John Sopel there for us with the latest analysis in Washington. Now, the ruling body of the Church of England, the General Synod, has in effect rejected a controversial report which insisted that marriage in church can only be between a man and a woman. The report had been produced by the House of Bishops, and the Archbishop of Canterbury had appealed for it to be approved as a way of continuing the debate on sexuality and same-sex marriage. Our religious affairs correspondent Martin Bashir has been following the debate, and this is his report.
In the House of Clergy, 93 in favour, 100 against, with 2 abstentions.
And with that, General Synod delivered a devastating blow to 3 years of deliberation on the issue of same-sex marriage.
So the motion was lost.
The debate itself, which lasted more than 2 hours, contained passionate and sometimes painful disclosures on both sides of the argument.
Outside of these walls, we are being heard as lacking in love.
Its purpose was not to please everyone, but rather to give a steer to the way we order our lives as God's people.
Please do not vote for this measure. We deserve better. Your LGBTI sisters and brothers deserve better, both here in the church and in the country.
All sexual expression outside the lifelong and permanent union of one man and woman is sinful.
Lesbian and gay Christians who held an all-day vigil outside Church House broke into song as news of the result filtered through.
I think what we've seen is a breakthrough of understanding, of love, of people coming together, really understanding the LGBT community.
Just before the debate, Archbishop Justin Welby held a private meeting at this church in an attempt to persuade members of Synod to vote with him. But he was ignored, and so were his fellow bishops. The fact the Synod has chosen not to take note of the report means effectively that the last 3 years' work is now rendered null and void, isn't it?
I absolutely disagree. What certainly is happening is that the report we've just presented will not be considered again as a report in these 5 years. But the process of shared conversation, which has been such a good process of listening and mutual understanding, will continue.
And so, after 3 years of discussions, a passionate debate and a personal plea from the Archbishop of Canterbury, the General Synod has voted against the report. It is an embarrassment for the House of Bishops following a fraught process.
O Lord, hear my prayer.
Tonight, the bishops say they'll reflect carefully and prayerfully on the result. Martin Bashir, BBC News at Church House.
So let's have a look then at some of the day's other news stories. The employment rate edged up to a record high of nearly 75% at the end of last year. Overall, there was a small rise in the number of workers born outside the European Union, but a small drop in the number of workers born in other EU countries. Thousands of Tata steelworkers in the UK have agreed to a less generous pension scheme in return for a £1 billion investment in the company and a commitment on jobs. The unions called it a tough decision. They say it was the only viable way to try to secure the future. The UK has been given a final warning by the European Commission over its failure to address harmful levels of toxic air. Legal air pollution limits have been surpassed in 16 areas, including London, Birmingham, Leeds and Glasgow. If the government can't show that it's taking action, it could face millions of pounds in fines and face legal action. The socialite Tara Palmer-Tompkinson died of natural causes from a perforated ulcer. She did not have a brain tumour, according to her sister. The author posted a series of tweets thanking people for their support. The 45-year-old was found dead in her flat in South Kensington last week. Now, police in Malaysia have arrested a 28-year-old woman in connection with the suspected poisoning of Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-nam died yesterday after he was attacked at Kuala Lumpur airport. He'd been critical of the North Korean regime for several years and had been living in exile after being passed over for the leadership. Our correspondent, Karishma Vaswamy, reports now from Kuala Lumpur.
It's business as usual in Pyongyang, everything moving at clockwork precision. Today, North Korea's reclusive leader Kim Jong-un made an appearance at a rally celebrating the 75th anniversary of his father's birth. But away from the pomp and the pageantry, a tale of murder and mystery. This man, Kim Jong-nam, is the North Korean leader's exiled older half-brother. He's believed to have been murdered at an airport in Malaysia on Monday. Between the hours of 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday, the man believed to be Kim Jong-nam was attacked in this crowded, busy airport. Police say that he was accosted by at least one woman who covered his face with a cloth filled with some sort of burning chemical. Malaysian police say these pictures may hold the key to what happened. These CCTV images have been broadcast on some Malaysian media networks. Police have arrested one woman carrying a Vietnamese passport who they say is connected to this case. Kim Jong-nam, seen here as a child with his father Kim Jong-il, was the favourite son and next in line to take over, until he fell out of favour and spent several years overseas in exile. It's not clear why or even if Kim Jong-nam was murdered. And while South Korea says it was definitely Pyongyang that ordered the hit, it could also have been a disgruntled business partner, Chinese triads, or a jilted lover.
Whoever killed him, that is one possible threat to Kim Jong-un removed. And even if it was not Pyongyang that ordered the killing, I doubt if there will be much mourning in Pyongyang. The two half-brothers didn't really get on. You find some people who will tell you they never actually met.
North Korea has yet to comment on the murder, but embassy officials spent hours at the hospital reportedly objecting to a post-mortem examination that could determine how he died. They've also requested that the body is released to them right away, but Malaysia has refused. Karishma Vaswamy, BBC News, Kuala Lumpur.
Now, the Prime Minister has been campaigning in Cumbria today ahead of next week's parliamentary by-election in Copeland. Theresa May's visit is being seen by some as rather unusual because the seat has been held by Labour for the best part of 100 years. Our political correspondent Ben Wright was there. He sent this report. There is some flash photography coming up.
The Tories' election machine is on the move, with a visit that could spell trouble for Labour. Theresa May's dash to Copeland, a Labour-held seat for over 80 years, proves the Prime Minister thinks the Conservatives can win it next week. And she tried to reassure voters a new nuclear power station planned for the constituency at Moorside would be built.
It's the Conservatives who are committed to the nuclear industry in the UK. We've agreed the first new nuclear build in a generation here in the United Kingdom. We recognise, and Trudy Harrison, our candidate here in Copeland, has made very clear to me the importance of Moorside and the importance of the nuclear industry.
This Cumbrian constituency relies on the nuclear industry for jobs. Sellafield is already here. That's one reason Labour might struggle to keep this seat.
These 3 roads here.
Because Jeremy Corbyn has spent his career sounding pretty cool about nuclear power.
So it's just about the importance of the hospital.
So Labour's campaign focus is on the local NHS.
We are having the threat of vital services being taken away from our hospital, relocated into Carlisle, 40 miles away, and it's not safe.
But is Jeremy Corbyn a hindrance to your campaign? He's got a muddled message on nuclear energy. Does he speak to communities like this in Copeland?
Look, I'm behind the nuclear industry, no ifs, no buts.
Close to Sellafield is Seascale. Jeremy Corbyn has said he backs the new plant, and it seems he needs to.
I don't think he's pro-nuclear, in spite of everything he says, and this is our livelihood.
It'll come down to the power station, Moorside, but both parties are for Moorside.
Does the nuclear issue sort of shape everyone's politics around here?
It is, particularly with Moorside at the moment, the way it's going on about it is bothering people, but it is the life and soul of the place, isn't it? You know, that is the jobs.
Labour's majority of 2,500 could be squeezed by smaller parties too.
I'm a maths teacher, I've done the numbers. Labour have moved to the left, the Tories have moved to the right, and there is a substantial vote in the middle for people who are looking for a pragmatic MP who talks about the real world.
And it's a seat that voted strongly for Brexit.
We would abolish HS2 for a start off. It's not going to benefit this area at all. We want to press to leave the EU because the sooner we do, the more we'll have more money for investment locally.
I wonder if Jeremy Corbyn will come again.
This vast constituency covers a swathe of the Lake District, and there's one party with a very distinctive nuclear message.
We're obviously trying to promote something else. All the other candidates are pro the new nuclear power plant. We think it's time to try to bring other businesses to Copeland and to bring something that's going to benefit everyone here.
Theresa May's visit to Copeland is a confident, if risky move. She's staking her name on a win. But that would be a coup for the Conservatives, because a governing party hasn't gained a parliamentary seat in a by-election since 1982. For Labour, the result will be seen as a crucial test of the party's leadership and message in a part of northern England that has long been seen as its heartland. Ben Wright, BBC News, Copeland.
And here is a full list of candidates for you standing in the Copeland parliamentary by-election. It takes place a week tomorrow. The list is there, and you can find out more by visiting the BBC News website. The full list is there too, plus some background and analysis of the campaign itself. So take a look at that. Now, hundreds of people have taken to the streets of Paris this evening to show their support for a black youth worker who claims he was raped by police earlier this month. There's been growing tension in some of the city's suburbs since the 22-year-old was arrested and allegedly assaulted a fortnight ago. One police officer has been charged with rape and 3 others have been charged with assault. But as our correspondent Lucy Williamson reports now from Paris, the president's appeal for calm is not being heeded.
Anger is spreading along France's urban veins. Tonight, chants of police, rapists, murderers rung out just south of the Sacré-Cœur. This is a protest about power, the power of individuals, their community, the state. France has been living with it for years, but in the last fortnight, the story of Théo's assault in a run-down Paris suburb has reignited it.
There are long-standing divisions rising to the surface here. The deepest anger in these protests has come from people who say they feel ignored and left behind, who feel that the French establishment is remote and those in power abusive, corrupt and self-serving.
Amateur footage of Teo's arrest shows him being taken to the car moments after allegedly being raped with a police baton. The police watchdog last week described it as a serious accident, not a deliberate rape.
I haven't been able to sleep for the past 5 nights. The medication they give me isn't enough. It's a very difficult ordeal for me.
It was quick, said a neighbour. He was lying here. They were hitting and kicking him. They brought him here behind the wall because it's out of sight of the cameras. The names of other young men who died while being chased or arrested in the suburbs north of Paris are repeated like a mantra of mistrust in the police.
They want us to just shut up, okay? They don't want us to express in any shape or form of protest, okay? And that's how I feel about it. It's not like they're here to protect us. They're just here to shut us down.
Over the past 2 weeks, the protests have grown, spreading to Rouen, Lyon, Marseille. This is no longer a case of one man in one Paris suburb. It's a reminder of France's deep divisions and a test of the trust between people and power. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Professional footballers who repeatedly head the ball during their career could be more prone to long-term brain damage. That's according to a new study which looked at the brains of 6 former players, all known for their skills at heading the ball. They all developed a form of dementia in later life before they died. The Football Association has welcomed the research. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has been looking at the findings.
Still nodding it on, but...
Jeff Astl's heading ability was well known, but he couldn't have imagined the long-term consequences. The West Brom and England footballer developed dementia and died in 2002 at the age of 59. A coroner said he had an industrial disease. In other words, heading a ball made a significant contribution to the cause of death. Since then, Jeff Astl's family have campaigned for more research on the impact of heading heavy, often waterlogged footballs in that era.
Jeff's job killed him. I knew the day Jeff was diagnosed, because why else would a man, physically fit, only 55, suddenly, overnight, virtually, it came on so rapidly, be diagnosed with dementia.
The Astl family was told at the time by the football authorities that a research programme had been started, but it was dropped because of technical flaws. Now, 15 years on, they're angry that nothing more has been done.
For too long it's been about protecting the product of football, and what it should be doing is protecting its players. And I think they're terrified that if the results come out and it's shown that football could be a killer.
The new study examined the brains of 6 former players who developed dementia, seen here in these images. 4 had chronic traumatic encephalopathy, also seen in former boxers. The Football Association, based here at Wembley, which covers England, said it took concerns about head injuries extremely seriously. It said it was committed to supporting further research, which had to be seen to be independent, robust and thorough. So what does it mean for the current generation of players, and is it safe for children to head the ball? The study authors make clear they're not drawing any conclusions.
I think the risks in heading the football are likely to be quite low, and I think that we need to engage with more research into finding out ways of making the game safer, but overall we think playing football is a safe thing to do.
But with children under 11 in the United States banned from heading a ball in practice, there's an ongoing debate about modern football and head injuries, as well as the game in previous decades. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, Arsenal look almost certain to be knocked out of the Champions League after they were heavily beaten in Germany this evening. Despite scoring an away goal in tonight's first leg, Arsene Wenger's side fell apart in the second half, eventually losing 5-1 to Bayern Munich. Our correspondent David Ornstein was watching the match.
For Arsenal, a familiar stage. 14 straight years through to the Champions League knockout phase, but that is where it tends to end. For Arsene Wenger, would this be a final tilt at European glory? The way his team started was ominous. Allow Arjen Robben time and space and witness the stunning result. Arsenal barely had a kick in the opening half hour until this poorly timed kick gave them a lifeline. Alexis Sanchez was denied from the spot, though deadly from the rebound. It was a precious away goal, but after half-time, Arsenal capitulated. Robert Lewandowski rose to restore Bayern's lead, and just 3 minutes later, Thiago raced clear to make it 3-1. Thiago then added a fourth, and the rout was completed by Thomas Müller. Arsenal's European campaign once again in tatters, and Arsene Wenger staring at a potentially defining defeat. David Ornstein, BBC News.
Well, Newsnight is about to begin over on BBC Two. Here's James O'Brien.
Tonight, President Trump attacks his own security apparatus and the US media on Twitter. Where will the Russia row go next? Join me now on BBC Two.
So that's Newsnight with James here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.